You're tuning into Creepy Time, where we bring you chilling, creepy stories and eerie urban legends To support Creepy Time, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss the story together. Now let's dive into today's tale. Rules of survival for a farmer. I remember that cold April afternoon with more clarity than most days in Chicago. Outside, drizzle clung to the glass, forming rivulets that fractured the gray sky. I sat in my worn armchair, taciturn, staring at the rain. My scar etched from my deployment in Afghanistan felt strangely hot as I revisited memories long buried. The knock came unexpectedly, firm, businesslike. A delivery man handed me an envelope thick with legal authority Harrison, Associates, attorneys at law firmware I'd never heard of. I signed. Immediately after, I began to tremble not with fear, but recognition. This letter was a threshold to something else, something I couldn't yet name. I sat there with the envelope, feeling the weight of inheritance. It wasn't just acreage or buildings, it was rules, boundaries, and perhaps a history I'd left behind. I turned the envelope over in my hand, half afraid to open it, but curiosity won. I pulled out the pages inside, the surprising message that I had inherited a farm in Gardnertown. On that page, more than land, there were mentions of obligations, traditions, warnings. Disregard them and you will face consequences. That evening, I drove the hour west to the farm. Rolling prairies turned to wheat fields. There was a stillness I'd never known in Chicago. When I arrived, Stormhawk, tall, quiet, mid-50s, met me at the gate. He spoke with a calm conviction. These are the rules you must follow. Sage by the door, hawk feathers above the stable, change them at the start of every month. I nodded, uncertain. I'd been in the army. I trusted strategy and science, not ancient superstition. Still, each instruction carried gravitas. Real-life story interlude. A friend of mine, Rosa, whose family owns a small farm in New Mexico, shared something similar. Her grandmother insisted on rituals at planting and harvest. Corn husks tied at windows, blessings spoken at solstice. It wasn't magic, she told me last summer over coffee. It was respect, a way to stay connected to land and lineage. She showed me a ledger where her grandmother tracked seasons, moon phases, plantings, and festivals. When I'm lost, I open it, Rosa said, eyes misting. I read an entry from decades ago and feel the same uncertainty and the same resolve. That was the first time I wondered, maybe these rules on this Iowa farm weren't superstition, they were guardianship. Walking through the farmhouse, as dusk settled, the wood floors creaked like an echo of time. Miriam, the older woman who'd managed the house since Bennett's passing, appeared from the kitchen doorway. She spoke softly. Your blood brought you here, not only your name, but your Lakota lineage. That statement startled me. I had assumed that Bennett, the previous owner, was just a distant relative. But Miriam insisted there was more letters, talismans, a wreath of sage, a hawk feather wreath at each entrance with a note Bennett had left. These were protective symbols, replaced monthly, no exceptions. I pressed her gently. How did he know? How did you? She met my gaze, calm. Bennett prepared. He hid messages in journals and letters. He trusted you. She leaned forward. There's danger in ignoring the lineage and walking away from obligations your ancestors never abandoned. In the Washington State Skagit Valley, a community near tribal coastlines conducts seasonal ceremonies tethered to life cycles and salmon migrations. One man, Julian, told me his great-grandmother taught him that acknowledging the water spirits through rituals during spawning season maintained balance and saved lives when storms struck. Without ceremony, he said, the seasons misalign. Floods come unexpected. He keeps a journal that outlines ceremonies and recounts what happened each year. That tradition, he believes, is as practical as meteorology. Once night settled, I woke to strange whispers. I tried to rationalize old house, wind, exhaustion, but something else lingered. The following morning, clouds parted with pale sunlight slanting through the window slats. I noted the unpredictability of calm after tension, but I also felt unsettled. Stormhawk took me to inspect the barn. Large beams, stained and aged, exuded an aura of permanence. Topaz dust settled in motes. At the entrance hung bundles of sage and hawk feathers, disheveled, sun-bleached. Stormhawk explained again, "These keep negative entities out. If a blackbird flies in, you have 24 hours to leave and return with a gift from your neighbor." That rule sounded like folklore, but his tone was grave. I asked, "What if there's no barn, or we forget?" Miriam appeared from behind me. "Then you risk inviting the harvester." Pause. That word, the harvester, felt like jagged glass in my chest. I swallowed hard. "And if it comes?" I whispered. She held my gaze solemn. "It's not a matter of if, but when." At that point, I grabbed my notebook and started writing. Rules, symbols, timelines. Sage bundles replaced monthly. Feathers retrieved from hay loss. Blackbird sightings recorded. Each rule noted. Each item sketched. I didn't yet believe in the consequence. I still leaned on logic, but the routine felt like preparation. I realized I was documenting something bigger than inheritance. History, legacy. Here's how you build momentum in a script. Establish the setting, introduce mystery, layer traditions, then embed reflections or parallels with real experiences. The viewer stays engaged not just for what happens next, but because they sense deeper meaning. When you alternate story and commentary naturally, without lineal breaks at every sentence, it reads as a cohesive narrative while giving them space to breathe. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the farmhouse floorboards, but the unease from the night before still clung to me. I stepped outside into the dawn, breathing in mist over dew-soaked fields. Alara, the young woman who helped with chores, waited by the kitchen door. She carried a bucket of water and offered a simple greeting, her eyes curious but guarded. "First task," she said softly, "replace the sage bundles." I followed her past the stable, noticing that the bundles had darkened edges, dusty feathers drooping. I lifted them down, replaced with fresh sage, nearby feathers I'd retrieved earlier. It felt symbolic, like waking ritual, cleansing not only space but self. That morning, I found a small laminated card on the kitchen table titled 6 Rules of the Farm. Each rule was brief. Breeze in, gather sage. Blackbird flies in leave and return with neighbor gift. Feather falls outside stable, you must not ignore, and so on. Stormhawk had typed it out, likely using notes from Bennett's journals. I pinned it by the bulletin board, both as reminder and altar. I wanted clarity, so I asked Miriam about the harvester what it was. She paused over a steaming mug of coffee, then said with a calm resolve, "In Lakota lore, the Wasahawakan cat, or the harvester, is neither spirit nor demon. It's ancient, older than memory, drawn to bloodlines connected to this land. Bennett's rituals slowed it, but your inheritance, your arrival, recharges that connection. It's waking up." I swallowed, leaning back. I asked, "What happened to Bennett?" She didn't spare me the answer. "He died here, quietly. A heart attack. Some say fear. I was there." She looked at me, eyes steady. "He governed the farm with resolve until the end, but he trusted me to guide you." During that week, I began learning the seasonal cycle of the land. I planted seedlings, tomatoes, basil, squash in the herb garden behind the house under Miriam's guidance. She taught me that sage isn't only for wards, it's also medicinal. "Burn it occasionally," she advised, "to cleanse energy." She told me that Bennett used sage smoke on harvest evenings, perhaps as awareness or openness to protect the land and community. In Peru, a Quechua farmer named Esteban shared with me how his ancestors celebrated Pachamama, Mother Earth, each August with ritual offerings, corn, beer, coca leaves to maintain harmony with spirits of earth and sky. He described how exchange with neighbors, a shared cup of chicha fulfilled agreements unseen, reinforcing community resilience. We do it for balance, Esteban smiled, not magic. His stories made me see Benet's warnings differently, as practical tradition cloaked in mystery. Late one evening, as wind shifted, I heard a tapping from the barn. My heart tensed. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the barn, notebook, an essential pen in hand. The door creaked as I pushed it open. In the corner, a feather lay on the ground, not on its hanger. I picked it up, heart pounding. I felt watched. Goosebumps spiked at the back of my neck. I held the feather up to the moonlight. It was black-tipped. A warning? A sign that the rules were already cracking. I reported it to Stormhawk at dinner. He didn't speak at first, just nodded slowly. Then he placed a hand over mine. This was always Bennett's rule, he said. Once the feather falls, the connection begins to change. You become the target. I looked at him in alarm. What do I do now? He replied, document it. Follow the rules exactly. And consider who you involve. The more observers, the weaker the power. So I did. I logged date, feather condition, location on my notebook, detailed each moment of uneased data for a strange kind of field study. My narrative, internal commentary. The trick to building tension in long-form storytelling is pacing. Small disturbances, misaligned symbols, rising stakes. Do not rush into terror. Instead, let small signs build curiosity and dread in parallel. Really world parallels like Esteban offering coca leaves to honor Pachamama or Rosa performing plant count rituals ground your viewers. They understand the universal impulse. Ritual is resilience. Tradition is strategy. By midweek, I decided to visit Gardnertown itself. I needed groceries, yes, but more so, I needed context. I drove down the quiet main street, a post office, a tiny church, one neon-lit bar sign that flickered, "The Puff Keeps Seeing Ewan." Even the name felt dreamlike. I went inside with a bottle of water I'd bought, sat at the bar. Jasper, a rugged man in flannel, introduced himself as a forest ranger. He said, "We knew Bennett. He and my father served together in Vietnam. I'm sorry about his passing." He leaned in over my water bottle, voice low. "That farm, it's not just dirt and fences." Bennett told me once, tradition isn't superstition, it's insurance. I raised an eyebrow, he nodded. This town, Dakota, we've lived around forest here, but strange things happen. Birds dive at windows, people dream dreams so vivid they wake screaming. Bennett never spoke of it, but he believed. A Canadian Métis woman, Sarah, shared how every October her family gathered around a fire to remember ancestors who crossed prairies. They rang bells at midnight to wake them safely into our time. She said, "When we skipped it, coughs started, animals died, crops failed. It's not superstition, it's acknowledgement." She showed me her ancestors' ledger, filled with candle counts and weather notes. I nodded to Jasper. "What about the harvester?" His jaw tightened. "They don't talk about it openly, but guess what locals found near the barn one dawn? A child's footprint in the dew. No one's kids sleep down there. Some said it was a warning." I left Gardner that evening with more questions than answers. I drove back to the farm and found the feather again floating just inside the barn door, out of place. That night, I dreamt of a child's laughter echoing through empty halls, black shadows dancing at corners, and a low hum that vibrated through my chest like distant bells. The next day, I woke to an odd calm that felt heavy, as if the farm itself was holding its breath. I had completed the rule documentation, tagged disturbed feathers, and replaced sage bundles. At breakfast, Miriam brought me a cup of her herbal blend. The aroma was subtle, earthy. She paused before handing it to me. "Some clarity," she said quietly. "It's time to visit the cave's ritual cave where Bennett once performed his ceremonies." I felt a ripple of dread. A cave hidden somewhere in the woodland behind the farm, tied to the land's spiritual resonance and anchored to my nascency in the Lakota lineage. Alara agreed to lead the way. Rowan, her younger cousin, wandered along, excitement tempered by caution. We hiked through thick brush, following a faint trail bordered by ancient oaks. The air cooled as the trees closed overhead. Mist hovered at ankle level. Rowan stumbled forward and gasped. Here, a low slope opened into earth, a carved stone circle marked by faint glyphs and carved feathers etched into limestone. The entrance felt alive, air pulsed outward. Not wind, something else, aromatic, as though sage smoke lingered, though none had burned. Inside, I flicked on my flashlight. The walls glowed faintly with phosphorescence. Moss ribboned the stone. Beneath my feet, cold earth exhaled. Miriam's words returned. This cave sucks life, but it also connects worlds. I took a small, nervous step forward, but Rowan shouted, nearly stumbling. On the ground, a human imprint. No toes, just an outline. A child's footprint, damp and fresh. My breath hitched. We retreated. Stormhawk met us at dusk as we trudged back. His expression grave, he said, "Rituals done there once anchored the harvester. Now it stirs again." He handed me a journal, Bennett's handwriting, fading but intelligible. Inside were drawings of constellations, feathers, moon cycles alongside instructions in Lakota. Blood and earth share pulse. I flipped pages slowly, noting sketches of a ceremony under full moon. Circle markings, offerings, chanting. The final entry, the marking date 2 days before Bennett's heart stopped. During the week, activity on the farm seemed to respond. I would wake before dawn, hearing distant tapping inside the house like nails on wood. Alara and Rowan insisted they heard nothing. Lights flickered overhead. Dinner tables shifted slightly. I found crow feathers scattered near windowsills where none had rested. A note on my last page of the notebook. The pieces disassemble, whatever that meant. My friend Maria once described her family's ancestral home in rural Guatemala, where every storm seemed to reawaken the house. She told me her grandmother would light candles and sprinkle corn seed on thresholds before storms. One night, a tree nearly crashed through the window, but the seed seemed to keep the energy at bay. "Not coincidence," she said calmly. "We don't invite what we don't acknowledge." Bennett's rituals, Maria's seed, Rosa's ledger, different cultures, same essence. Acknowledgement builds guardianship. On a clear full moon night, I agreed to perform a preliminary ceremony. Miriam taught me to light sage and cedar branches in 3 bowls placed at the cave's entrance, offerings of tobacco, corn, and sage. She repeated Lakota verse. Stormhawk beat a drum 6 times. Candles flickered. Rowan draped a hawk feather wreath around the entrance. When the final verse was spoken, a wind rushed outward from the cave as though it exhaled. My chest tightened. The earth trembled slightly beneath our boots. I felt something unseen watching us. Not antagonist yet, but active. Then Rowan screamed. Shadows moved inside the cave. Mouth not wind, not animal. In the reflection of a dropped flashlight shard, I glimpsed a pale face elongated, no nose, mouth a dark gape. It vanished in a blink. My breath caught. I held Rowan close. He whimpered. I whispered a blend of fear and fierce resolve. "We follow Bennett's rules now." "Exactly." Miriam nodded, face solemn. "You've made contact. Now you know." Back in the farmhouse kitchen, I poured water slowly, hands trembling, eyes on my notebook. These events footprint inside cave, Flickers of movement, distant laughter that Rose told me once about her grandmother. Voices at solstice felt simultaneous metaphor and threat. It wasn't just folklore, this was testing, measuring my resolve. The core is escalation. Small disturbances become unmistakable signs. Viewers escalate with the protagonist. Ritual prep, cave lore, ancestral tie-ins. Mix excerpts from journal, descriptions of physical space, emotional stakes, and interwoven real-life parallels. It builds empathy, dread, purpose. One late night, I awoke to childlike giggling echoing behind my bedroom door. The air soured, shadows pooled. I questioned my bearings, was the giggle real? I rose only to find the door slightly ajar and cold air seeping. I shut it tight and held my breath. Sleep didn't return. By now, the tension on the farm had become unmistakable. Strange sounds echoed at night, soft thumps against walls, whispers drifting through empty hallways. The air felt saturated, heavy with menace. I found new feathers picked clean, lying in anxious formation on the floor. I logged each with increasing concern. The rules, once distant suggestions, felt urgent. Stormhawk and I met at dawn for a walk through the barley field. He stopped midway and motioned for me to look. At the edge of the field was a simple totem, a hawk feather ringed by sage tied to a wooden stake. But where there should have been green, the sage was blackened, at the tips charred. What happens when barriers weaken, he said, is visible. I took a deep breath. That afternoon, Miriam brought more journal entries, drawings of the cave's glyphs connected to bloodline images. Lakota figures in ceremonial stance offering gestures towards sky and earth. One detail struck me, a phrase in old Lakota asterisk, Tangyang Mp, Kate Kawapa, loosely. I will cross worlds if the circle breaks. Bennett underlined it. I felt a cold prickle as I read it. Ilera arrived with fresh water jug in hand and asked me to come outside. On the porch, she held a small wooden carving of a child, stylized and eerie. She passed it to me quietly, voice shaking. Found it in the barn corner this morning. Its eyes were hollow, its form rustic, handcrafted but not old. I stared at it, afraid it might come alive in my hands. I asked Rowan later, "Where did you go?" He looked away, to the bend by the creek. I followed him. Beneath the willow, a shallow hollow held dried mud footprints, exact match for the cave print. Two prints, side by side, small and identical. On one had been laid a hawk feather. Under it, a single sage leaf. My heart thundered. Rowan barely met my gaze. I told Miriam and Stormhawk. She sighed deeply. The harvester marks its presence with tokens. It mimics the rules as if mocking us. Stormhawk nodded. Circular mimicry, to weaken the barrier. He gestured to the fields around us. Every rule will have a reflection. You must choose which to break and which to enforce. I shivered. That evening, I researched real-world parallels in folklore. A Turkish storyteller spoke of a jinn that mimicked household rules to trap families. A Senegalese hunter said that a forest spirit would leave guests identical footprints to lure neighbors into danger. The core, shadows mirror, mock, weaken, trust. I logged these stories side by side with Bennett's entries. They formed pattern recognition beyond luck. I arranged an impromptu council in the farmhouse. Miriam, Stormhawk, Alara, Rowan, and me. By moonlight, we lay out the ledger, journals, rules, chart, symbols, the cave map, and the wooden carving. Miriam spoke in measured tone. We prepare, a binding ritual on the full moon. Sage and cedar, offerings, Lakota verse. But this time, we add sight witnesses. The power of bearing witness weakens the harvester's ability to deceive. Rowan creased his brow. More people increases risk. Stormhawk nodded gently. It also diffuses its focus. I recalled a Sami healer, Astrida, who invited villagers into her curtain-lit tent during the darkest month. She said, "When you face the mountain alone, fear grows. When 10 stand with you, fear becomes story. The lesson, collective presence, transforms the unknown into shared lore and weakens unseen binds." We prepared. Alara and I harvested sage, cedar, corn leaves. Stormhawk carved extra stakes to mark perimeters. Miriam crafted small sachets of sage smoke. Rowan was nervous but committed. I stayed awake, writing rules list, ceremonial step outlines, anything to minimize confusion. One task haunted me: find a way to mend the fallen feather barrier at the main barn. I resolved to replace feathers myself at midnight, new, bright. That night, I lit a torch and climbed to the loft, careful. As I replaced the feathers and blew out the torch, I heard crying from below. Child's tears or illusion? I froze, breath catching, then descended. No figure, only memory. I pressed sage smoke jar closed tight. I woke hours later with odd symbols scratched on my notebook. Circles intersecting arrow points, not my penmanship. Next day, Rowan found a page in Bennett's last entries that described a child-shaped figure watched by no eyes but seeing all, paired with the words, "Must treat the child as host, not prey." My heart clenched. It became clear. The harvester may take shape as a child to break trust. I scanned the house, heard faint steps above, admired the quiet before it shattered. We gathered at moonrise outside the cave, 4 of us, bearing witness, Miriam chanting, Stormhawk beating drum, Rowan holding candle, Alara hovering. I stood at the edge. First, sage, smoke, cedar swirls. We whispered Lakota lines. We laid offerings, corn, tobacco in stone bowls. Then silence. A wind roared. The glyphs inside glowed faintly. The earth vibrated. I felt a presence like the weight of falling snow. A small laugh echoed Child's laugh. I held my breath. Rowan nearly collapsed. Miriam whispered, "We do not respond." Stormhawk held firm. No fear. A figure appeared beyond the entrance. A pale child silhouette. Elongated limbs. Eyes unformed. Hovering below the symbols. It mirrored Rowan's posture. Then it dissolved into the darkness. I exhaled and realized that the rules were working. We observed. We didn't flinch. We upheld the circle. The shadows retreated. The presence pulsed, slowed, then vanished. Silence reclaimed ground. Afterward, the group dispersed, slowly exhausted, triumphant. I felt the ledger snap together, the rules binding stronger, but I also knew this wasn't the end. We'd confronted a returning power, but any slip could break the circle. I resolved to write all of this: rules, reflections, warnings for others who might inherit. The lessons needed recording. This is where the story pivots. Confrontation builds, resistance happens, small victory but not full closure. Real-life interwoven folklore reinforced that facing the unknown with community reduces its hold. The viewer senses a change in tactics, clarity of stakes, and emotional catharsis balanced with lingering dread. That night, as the sky dimmed to deep indigo, we gathered again at the cave entrance, this time with the whole farm's boundary marked, stakes with fresh sage, feather wreaths shining in moonlight. I had invited Jasper from Gardner Town as an external witness. Our group, 6 people, from different walks: Miriam, Stormhawk, Alara, Rowan, Jasper, and me. The age-old power of witnessing would dilute the harvester's influence, we hoped. Before the ceremony began, I shared Bennett's last journal entry with the group. It told of ancestral voice whispered in dreams, calling him toward the cave. I emphasized that our work wasn't just for personal safety, it was stewardship of a bloodline waiting for recognition. Jasper nodded. He had heard rumor but never witnessed the detail. We started with offerings in triple bowls: tobacco leaves, sage smoke, corn kernels. Miriam intoned verses in Lakota, voice strong but measured. Stormhawk beat the drum 6 beats for each cardinal direction. Rowan held a feather-covered wreath at chest level. Ilara carried a lantern. I stood behind the group, notebook open, documenting every shift. From inside the cave emerged a gust of wind spiraling outward. Shadows twined upward like black ribbons. Whispered laughter melted into a deep hum, vibrating through our bones. Jasper swallowed audibly. Roman trembled, but I kept focus. On the ledger I'd copied Bennett's underlined phrase, "If the circle stands, the child cannot cross." I repeated it softly. A pale shape flickered at the cave mouth. A childlike figure, proportions off arms too long, head tilted. It watched us silently for a moment. We held ground, then it paused. Then its body blurred and elongated, dark tendrils sweeping toward Rowan. Without thinking, I stepped forward and sprayed sage water at the figure. It recoiled like mist. A shriek burst from Rowan, fear and release. The figure faltered and collapsed into a swirl of black feathers that spiraled into the sky before dissipating. Silence returned. The cave air cooled sharply. The glyphs etched into the rock glowed faintly, then faded. Our breaths synchronized, some sobbing softly, others exhaling long-held tension. We stood in dawn's gray light, shadows long on the ground. At that moment, Jason from Gardner Town stepped forward and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Your family held strong," he said gently. "The circle broke and held." I nodded, tears unstuck. Stormhawk looked into the cave and said, voice low, "It's gone for now." We gathered offerings into the bowls, crushed sage ashes, scattered corn kernels along the boundary. Rowan placed a final feather wreath across the cave entrance. The hush of the night seemed to relax its grip. For the first time in weeks, the farm felt like mine, troubled, sacred, but anchored. We returned to the farmhouse in silence, exhausted but hopeful. In the kitchen, a plate of herbal tea and leftover stew warmed in the center of the table. We sat, hands still shaking, eyes reflecting what we had endured. I cleared my throat and said, "I'm going to organize these journals and rules, make them clear, accessible, not just for me, in case others come." Miriam smiled quietly, grip firm on hers. Rowan sipped tea, resolute. Ilara wiped tears. Stormhawk looked outward, thoughtful but steady. That night, sleep came even if restless. I woke before dawn, jotted final notes. Ritual succeeded, circle renewed, rules stronger. Possible slip points remain. Blackbird flight, fresh disturbances. Vigilance must continue. Rowan slept beside me, his breathing calm. In the following days, the farm's rhythm returned. Viewers would sense relief but not complacency. I woke each morning before sunrise, checking feathers, replacing sage, walking perimeter with Jasper or Ilara in muted routine. The air felt lighter, crow flights were cautious, blackbirds avoided the barns. But occasional whisper of shifting air or creak of wood reminded me relic threats remained. I spent daylight hours cataloging Bennett's journals, my notes, the traditions I learned. I reorganized everything into categories: rules of the farm, cave symbols and glyphs, ritual steps, when to involve witnesses, warning signs and logs. I plan to write a guide for heirs, for neighbors, for anyone inheriting more than land. A model of what stewardship entails when heritage is burden and blessing. One afternoon, I revisited Gardner Town. In the bar, Jasper joined me. He spoke of archivists and historians interested in local lore. My experiences might fit into this tradition. He offered that his father's ranger unit would help verify material remains, footprints, glyphs, relics, should we preserve the cave and its significance. It felt like future planning, not just survival, but legacy preservation. I remembered talking to Sarah from Canada, who preserved ancestral Métis journals. She said, when our rituals are written, people forget the meaning without context, but if you write the why, the story it survives. That insight guided my structure. The practical tradition, the how, and most importantly, the why behind it must be preserved. Back at the farmhouse, I organized the final boundary markers with Rowan and Alara. We replaced feather wreaths, relit perimeter, sage torches, pulled corn offerings. We walked the 4 stakes at cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, explaining to Rowan why each was set. He nodded, respectful. Miriam and Stormhawk gave me a small carved box. They said it was Bennett's. Inside, a folded ritual cloth, a cedar smoke sachet, a small collection of sage ashes, and a single hawk feather intact. Keep it safe, Miriam said. It's the seed of the circle. I tucked them into my pack. That night, as I lay back in the farmhouse bed, I felt fatigue but also quiet purpose. I thought of Bennett, his faith in me, the bloodline he believed he anchored. I thought of my service, my loss, my return, not only to this land, but to ancestry. In the dim dawn light, I turned off the bedside lamp. I rose and stepped outside onto the porch. I looked toward the fields, the barn, the distant silhouette of caves beyond trees. The air still held promise. Legacy can be both burden and gift. Inheriting land, traditions, or stories may feel weighty, but through stewardship and ritual, you honor more than history. You protect futures. Respecting rules isn't blind obedience, it's strategy. Symbols like sage, feathers, offerings, they may seem symbolic. But when logged, explained, witnessed, they form a durable system of acknowledgement and care. Community undermines fear. When facing unknowns, involving witnesses dilutes the power of unseen threats. Shared resilience is stronger than solitude. Story matters as much as structure. Recording why traditions endure is as vital as following them. Context anchors meaning for future inheritors. Asterisk vigilance is ongoing. A ritual or victory may hold the line, but awareness must remain. Blackbirds might return. Rules may need revision. Dedication is perpetual. This isn't just a narrative about a farm in Iowa or a mythic figure called the Harvester. It's about how connection to land, lineage, and wisdom traditions can survive in the modern world if acknowledged, documented, and respected. The boundary wakes when ignored, but it also strengthens when honored. So, whether you inherit unexplained rules, family stories, ancestral land, or spiritual teachings, approach them with curiosity, with structure, with community, and with purpose. Because sometimes the greatest confrontation isn't with a spirit in the cave, it's with our own decision to care.